Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We have a good one for you, as always. Welcome to Newsflash. What a day it has been, getting you caught up on all the latest with Biden's big decision to drop out, just as I predicted on our last very hastily put together show. We are finding out more, and actually quite a bit more, about what made Biden finally decide to drop out. And it was just as I predicted, all on Saturday night. That was what really did it. We'll give you the factors behind his decision and why this could be more of a going concern with the Democratic Party in the coming weeks and months, as we start to find out more about the kind of final days of the Biden campaign, as we enter the final days of the Biden presidency. Also, speaking of the campaign, Kamala Harris kind of cemented herself as at least the very, very presumptive frontrunner for the new nominee of the Democratic Party. We'll take a look at Joe Biden speaking for the first time as a disembodied voice in his Wilmington, Delaware campaign headquarters, as Kamala went to go speak to her, now new campaign. We'll take a look at some polling showing that Kamala Harris is the clear choice of Democratic voters. We'll also give you an update on the latest on the ongoing genocide in Gaza and a very testy Secret Service hearing today on Capitol Hill. All right, so we have to start with this. This is a big, long read in Politico. Why Biden finally quit. For 23 days, he insisted on pushing forward with his re-election bid. It felt like, at the same time, it felt like it went really fast, but also really, really slow, which is kind of weird. But, he had up until very, very, very soon before he dropped out, he was pretty much dead set on it. Early Saturday, he told aides that everything was full steam ahead. But then his two aides, one of whom, Mike Donilon, who was accused of essentially by Nancy Pelosi in a kind of private conversation that has since gotten out, of giving the president that bad information that has caused him to, prolong what should have been a pretty obvious decision of getting him to stay out of the, getting him to finally drop out of the race. Mike Donilon and his, longtime friend, longtime aide, Steve Ricchetti, went to Biden. They drove to see the president at his house on the Delaware Shore on Friday. Donilon arrived on Saturday. The two men, both of whom had been by Biden's side during key decisions about whether to seek the presidency in 2016 and 2020, this is Ricchetti and Donilon, sat at a distance from the president, but gave him news that would hasten the end of his political career. In addition to presenting new concerns from lawmakers and updates on a fundraising operation that had slowed considerably, they carried the campaign's own polls. And I think, at least if you take him at his word, the polls were the big thing that he was looking at, to see if he still had a pathway to win. The polls would tell him. And, we got word they were kind of testing him against Kamala Harris to try and see how that would work out. And the polls that Ricchetti and Donilon give him on that nighttime period, those polls are essentially the ones that, that Saturday night period, those are the ones that essentially get him to go out. The only two people with Biden in the residence when he arose on Sunday were the First Lady Jill Biden and two other trusted aides, Andy Tomasini, who's a chief of staff or deputy chief of staff and a top assistant to the First Lady, Anthony Bernal. At 1:45 p.m., he notified a somewhat larger group of close aides that he decided the night before to end his quest for a second term, reading his letter and thanking them for their service. A minute later, before any other campaign and White House staffers could be notified, he posted the historic letter on X. And we heard about my reaction yesterday on the show. I was like, I just had the kind of the shocking moment. My heart skipped a beat. I was like, oh my God, it finally happened. But his own party, after 3 weeks of deriding him privately as an isolated, deluded lion in winter, dragging other Democrats down with him, of course, was showering him with loving tributes, praising his record career of public service, and a selfless decision, they said, put his country first. And we'll get into this about, why I don't agree at all with that framing. Of course, throughout the show with the stuff in Gaza, talking about, why he is not a good person, why he's always been a very arrogant person, somebody who has been very, very power hungry. And, putting that aside is a, good thing. And it's kind of hard, it's a good thing for the country, but it's not something that I think should have had to have been as hard as it was. And that doesn't just fall on Joe Biden. It falls on the whole Democratic Party political system. Get him to this place where he felt like he was in this catbird seat when he clearly should never have come close in any competent political party. Rather, the big thing here, Politico says here, for Biden himself was that was finally convinced of what so many other Democrats had come to believe since his poor debate performance last month: he couldn't win. When the campaign commissioned new battleground polling over the last week, it was the first time they had done surveys in some key states in more than 2 months, according to 2 people familiar with the surveys. And the numbers were grim, showing Biden not just trailing in all 6 critical swing states, but collapsing in places like Virginia, New Mexico, where Democrats had not planned on needing to spend massive resources to win. With that knowledge and the awareness that more party elders, including more of his former Senate colleagues, would pile on the public pressure campaign, a sudden exit offered the president the best chance to make it appear the decision came on his own terms. Because, we all know essentially that it did. You could see there was a certain amount of, I think, resentment in that letter, kind of disappointment about, this is what's come to, this is what I got to do. It was kind of, a face-saving move of high importance to Jill Biden, to make that clear, who, according to people familiar with recent conversations, was adamant that her husband's dignity be preserved. And, what else did I predict? When push comes to shove, I said this on last night's show that I did walking around in my backyard, that when we come down and we look back at this, there's going to be one person who is singularly responsible above it all, and that would be Nancy Pelosi. And this is it from the Politico article. Nancy made clear that they could do this the easy way or the hard way, said one Democrat familiar with the private conversations who was granted anonymity to speak candidly. She gave them 3 weeks of the easy way. It was about to be the hard way. Essentially, they were trying to give him some respect, trying to let him make the decision. But on Capitol Hill, it seemed around Saturday that the decision had been made. When he got COVID, you kind of got the sense that, that was the beginning of the end. And I remember literally publishing a show, then going on Twitter and being like, I just published a show right before, Biden was announced to have had COVID. And that, I think, really felt, and that kind of led me to, title the show, Can Biden Survive the Weekend? I did think he would honestly kind of hold on a little bit longer, but I think that these signs, the fact that there was absolutely no leaks for, the couple of 24, 36 hours before Biden went ahead and dropped out, does kind of show you that, as they say in this article, he was gone offline. He kind of got the message. It was from Chuck, Hakeem, and Pelosi that he was kind of processing the decision and eventually was going to, make the decision, as so many Democrats have been obliquely referencing over the past few days or past few weeks, really. Ever since the debate, Biden and his closest allies had been determined to rebound, convinced that he remained the party's best chance to defeat former President Trump, and optimistic they could contain the fallout. But it was just a series of kind of, sit-down interviews that weren't the best, some press conference mistakes that weren't the best, and I think this is, this came kind of on top of all the, kind of subsequent mistakes and, the continued public pressure that we saw from lawmakers. You had the polls that really added up, and I think the Saturday night decision is the polls that finally got through to Biden. But I think, through all these situations, especially throughout the times that it kind of looked like Biden could recover and he was going to stay in the race, we still heard nonstop leak after leak after leak from a bunch of people who said, they were, crying themselves to sleep because they knew that Biden was in a bad situation. They knew that he was kind of incompetent, but they still didn't care. And we're still going to try to, push him forward. And that's really what I was kind of railing at through the last few weeks on the show. And when, and I said they need this kind of strong leader figure like Nancy Pelosi to come in and lead the charge to do something that's this kind of, bold, because they know they're kind of cooked, but they don't know exactly how to get out of the oven. They needed that Nancy Pelosi's hand to come in and take them out. And I think this they knew it, and they knew they were cooked, again, in part because of the polls, in part because of the poor, performances. But there were some times where those performances weren't so poor over these last, 23 days. And a big part of that equation has been the equation of why the pressure keeps going is because they know. Like, I think it is really, really clear, really, really obvious. They knew for a very long time what kind of state he was in. And they're saying, yeah, I don't want to have to deal with this for another 4 more years. Like, yeah, this is bad. We got to do something about this. Like, I know very, very well what kind of state he was in. And this comes out in a Wall Street Journal article, which is, paywalled, which is kind of probably for the best because we'd spend way too much time on this podcast kind of going through it. But this is from the Wall Street Journal talking about President Biden back when he was trying to persuade congressional Democrats to pass the infrastructure bill when Nancy Pelosi took the speaker, in the microphone, kind of a meeting of House Democrats. Nancy Pelosi, they described the scene where she takes the microphone and she is pissed because Biden had just gotten up there for, 30 minutes of remarks on Capitol Hill. He spoke disjointedly and failed to make a concrete ask of lawmakers, the way the WSJ puts it, according to Democrats in the room. And Pelosi gets up there and goes, I'll just try and say what the president was trying to say. And this was in 2021, October 2021. Dean Phillips recalled, who was in the room at the time, he obviously went to go on, ruin his political career by actually doing what the Democratic Party should have done and has challenged someone in the Democratic Party should have done, which is challenged Joe Biden in the primary. It was the first time I remember people pretty jarred with what they had seen. This was October 2021, a whole year before those midterms. And it was also, by the way, and I think this is a big part of it, and I think this is why, you do kind of have to shift some of the culpability from the low level down. It's like, everyone is, in some ways, they can kind of pass it off and blame someone else, but really everyone in the Democratic Party should have known what was going on here. Like, this was October 2021. They have this disastrous meeting where he has, I think he behaves like Biden. He speaks like Biden when literally trying to do one of the most important tasks that a president could do, which is actually work with the lawmakers to get a key priority of his done and passed, and he is unable to do this back again in October of 2021. And the party bigwigs, first, I think the fact that this wasn't more of news, that goes on the people in the room, the Democratic lawmakers who were in the room, but I think this also goes on the party bigwigs who kind of had more power to step up and do something about it, at the time to make more of an effort, but also, kind of goes to Biden and his inner circle for cloistering him and not having him in 3 years meet with congressional lawmakers in person and always getting the staff. It's been a consistent complaint from pretty much everyone who's tried to, reach and have a conversation with Joe Biden, especially recently. And like, this is all a kind of, it really does look like a cover-up of a situation that a lot of people knew was a lot worse, a lot quicker than a lot of people thought. So, I think that's a very, very clear situation, and I think it's going to come out more and more over time, especially if the Democrats and Republicans or right-wing media try and dig into this. It's like, how long did they know that they were putting forward somebody who was of this mental state and who had these kind of moments? And it's like, I think there was probably a chunk of them who were just so hopped up on the mythology of Biden and, who he is, what type of guy he is. He's just, that's just good old Joe, or just kind of dismissed it in their minds, and I think that's on them to a certain extent as well. But it's also, I think it's, it's all mostly on the people at the top, people like Biden, people like Donald and Ricchetti, who kept him doing this type of stuff, until it was literally the debate made it just, too obvious to hide. We had 70s, 80% of people saying, oh, Joe Biden's too old. Well, the elites were, again, I don't like to necessarily use this term because it's not the most precise definition of elites that I think should be used. But, the party bigwigs were saying all this BS about, it's like, oh wait, I could go run. He runs 5K every morning. He's the healthiest president we've ever had. Like, it's so good. It's perfect. Like, we are in a great situation. Nothing to worry about. Even the interns have trouble keeping up with him in the White House. It's just like, come on. Like that stuff is happening while this other stuff about him, confusing Democratic lawmakers trying to pass the infrastructure bill back in 2021. Maybe that's why it took so damn long, because he was talking all that nonsense. Like he couldn't negotiate with Joe Manchin just because he wasn't physically capable or mentally capable of doing it to get his stuff done. I think that's that's a possibility we're kind of coming into light now. It was a big theme of this show on the past, for about a year and a half, just hammering Biden for not taking more action on getting his agenda passed. And he was a purported agenda that he purports to care about, but he may not even have been able to do it. He may not have been able to mount that effort. He did in 10 days, I think, or he did like 200 calls or 20 calls, in a matter of I think it was like a day or something like that after the debate. He called about 20 people. Kamala yesterday called 100 people. Like, it's just that simple level stuff that the Democrats, apparently, as we'll find more and more about, they knew about that. They knew what kind of situation they were in, and they still pushed through with Joe Biden, and just him not being able to kind of physically do that work. And now I think it's clear they have someone who is quite a bit younger and can do that work. So, that is definitely a good thing. But I think we're going to definitely find out just the new levels of irresponsibility that have been going on with this campaign. And this, Wall Street Journal article is probably going to be just the trickling open of the floodgates about how much. And I think, Wall Street Journal is kind of well placed because they're not really right-wing media, but they're not really left-wing media. In terms of Democrat or Republican, they don't have a super specific color. The Republican media is a lot crazier than Wall Street Journal, and the liberal media is a lot, more tied with the Democratic Party, I would say. And so you do have this kind of niche where they feel, I think, more comfortable reporting on stories that make all the Democratic Party look bad about Biden's age. So this may be, the Wall Street Journal may be kind of a prime source to watch on this. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they pushed this through, how they got to this point that led up to the debate where people were finally just like, no, this cannot go on anymore. And the elites, as Jake Tapper said, of the party, started to catch up to where the voters had been on it for actually quite a while. And speaking of all that, speaking of not having meetings, I think it is an objective. When we had LBJ drop out, he was right there in the White House, Oval Office address, I'm not going to be seeking a second term. When we had Joe Biden drop out, he does it, posts on a letter on Twitter and says, I'll talk to you later in the week. So it turns out he was able to speak maybe a little bit sooner than we expected, maybe a little bit later than we would have liked. And this is him. So essentially the scene is, if you haven't seen the video, this is a kind of campaign headquarters room, like a ward room for the campaign, set up in a press conference. And they essentially took all the Joe signs down, put all the Kamala signs up, because obviously Joe has fully endorsed Kamala, at least through his Twitter. And he makes a call in to the campaign headquarters for about 4 minutes, where he's just kind of over the speaker system there. And I think it's Julie Chavez Rodriguez, one of the top campaign officials, is just standing there at the podium right before Kamala Harris gets in to speak. And it was kind of a very impromptu moment. Let's take a listen to how that went.
Keep me out of people's hair for the next 3 or 4 days. But I'm going to be on the road, and I'm not going anywhere. It's kept me away a little bit, but I want people to remember that what we have done has been incredible, and we get so much more we're going to get done. And so I want to say hello to Kamala if she can hear me. I know she's going to be speaking shortly, and I want to say to the team, embrace her. She's the best. I want to call today to thank everybody in this effort. I know yesterday's news was surprising, and it was hard for you to hear, but it was the right thing to do. I know it's hard because you poured your heart and soul into me to help us win this thing, help me get this nomination, help me win the nomination, and then go on to win the presidency. But you're an amazing team. But we've got a great. I think we made the right decision. I know how hard you've worked, how many sacrifices you made, and so many of you uprooted your lives for me. And the kind of commitment few people make for anything these days, but you made it. And I've been honored and humbled. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. My word is a Biden, that for all you've done for me and my family. And we built the best campaign in organization in history. I've been doing this. I always kid and say, I know I'm only 40, but I've been around a long time. I don't know of a better campaign organization, grassroots campaign. We have over 230 offices opened. We have over 2,000 paid staff, and we have literally several thousand volunteers on a regular basis, thousands of them. And they've been relentless and tireless in reaching out and contacting voters. The leadership of this campaign has been amazing. Jen O'Malley Dillon, Julie Quinn, Michael Tyler, Rob Flaherty, Rufus on raising money, and so many more. You built this team. You brought them together. You brought us together. You've inspired them, and you've done what leaders do. Now we got to, the name has changed at the top of the ticket, but the mission hasn't changed at all. And by the way, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be out there in the campaign with her, with Kamala. I'm going to be working like hell, both as a sitting president, getting legislation passed, as well as in campaigning. What we still need to save this democracy. And Trump is still a danger to the community. He's a danger to the nation. And just ask my foreign policy colleagues, my counterparts, and other people around the world and at home. Look, so I'm hoping you'll give every bit of your heart and soul that you gave to me to Kamala. And I want you to know, I won't be on the ticket, but I'm still going to be fully engaged. I've got 6 months left in my presidency. I'm determined to get as much done as I possibly can, both foreign policy and domestic policy. Keep lowering costs for families, continue to speak out on guns and child care, elder care, prescription drugs, and climate. Climate still is the existential threat that we face, and if we don't win this thing, it's all in jeopardy.
So, yeah, it does kind of go on for a little bit longer there, but some things that I was kind of looking for, a lot of it's the same stuff, rallying the troops, saying he's going to be fully supporting Kamala Harris. It's going to be interesting to see what she does with him on the campaign trail. I think probably less is more when it comes to Biden on the campaign trail, as we have seen in the last few weeks, really the last 4 years and beyond. But I do think there was definitely something that he didn't leave out. He didn't really explain to the American people why he made the decision. I think, everyone knows, but to kind of hear him say it, I think would be a very kind of newsworthy event. He may speak in some sort of more expanded way in the future, although with the amount of stress that it's put him through and it put the campaign through, I don't know if that's something that they would really want. Which I guess it kind of makes sense. So he kind of does get to check this off the list. He's got COVID, so it kind of gives him an excuse to not really be, even though his symptoms apparently are he's getting close to being better according to the White House doctor. He is not yet fully kind of on there, really explaining to the people in this kind of historical way. Like, I just felt like I couldn't do it anymore. Whatever the reason may be, however he comes out and explains to the American people his decision, a really historic decision to step down. So I think it's interesting to hear from Biden for the very first time since that decision in person. Well, he was on the phone in the room. He wasn't in the room. He was probably in his home in Rehoboth Beach, but they were just down the road in Wilmington. But yeah, so still, I think as you can hear there, no real kind of confirmation. I think it's be interesting to see in what way he kind of comes out and does that. It's going to waste probably some sort of gravitas to it, not just a normal campaign rally where he actually goes into explaining, this is why I decided to step down. This is the calculations that I saw, and I just thought I couldn't win. Maybe he won't comment on his fitness for office or his age really as much, but we will see on that. But in the first time, more than 24 hours after he announced that he is stepping down from the race, he does a brief 4-minute phone call into the campaign headquarters that's kind of televised on all the networks, but he does not really say too much. All right, let's move to the new woman in charge, Kamala Harris. Interesting kind of polling from her coming out in the Silver Bulletin, which is Nate Silver's new newsletter. The scenarios where Harris doesn't get nominated involve some sort of shoe dropping. Maybe she gets cold feet at the prospect of running for president. Maybe there's some sort of scandal we're unaware of. But a vice president ought to be pretty thoroughly vetted. I don't know what happens if her polling winds up being very poor against Donald Trump, but it's probably too late, with many people who would have run against her having endorsed her instead. So the chances are 100% no, but they're probably higher than 88%. Maybe the 95% or something on that order. I suppose you shouldn't technically call her the presumptive nominee, but I wouldn't blame you too much if you did, which I think is a pretty fair way of putting it, where Kamala is right now in terms of the general nomination process. It's much more conversation about who she's going to pick for vice president, whether who's going to be, the new top of the ticket person. The mood on Democratic Twitter was giddy, but the giddiness has paid dividends as Democrats and Harris have raised $250 million since Biden announced yesterday that he'd drop out. Some of this undoubtedly reflects a pent-up demand for a candidate who'd do the basic blocking and tackling of running a campaign. But Biden's campaign has been demoralizing to Democrats, a never-ending string of bad polls and dubious public appearances or equally dubious excuses. Suddenly having a chance when you thought you were drawing dead can produce a euphoric feeling. Do I think Harris gives Democrats the best chance against Trump? Probably not, and the betting markets don't think so either. But I don't think Democrats really had much of a choice in the matter. Their options were probably these. Option A, rallying behind Harris and giving her a running start as they have. B, having some sort of open process where Harris was very likely to be selected anyway, but there might be a lot of hurt feelings. I'm not sure that option B would have been quite so bad, but I think we need to be realistic about what the outcome of the process would have been, which is Harris being chosen anyway, in which case option A is the dominant strategy. But I do think there is something to be said, even if Kamala Harris did get chosen in option B, which would have been pretty likely, as we, kind of understood that the top serious people in terms of the other contenders in the Democratic Party were not really interested in running in 2024 to give a better chance for 2028. I think it would have, putting her through some sort of fire, either real or, kind of not real, would have been something that probably would have come to her benefit. But as it seems now, people have endorsed her and no real other candidates are willing to run. And, Nancy Pelosi had quite a moment in the halls of Congress today where she's like, what do you think about, she was asked, what do you think about this being kind of a closed process, people uniting behind Kamala Harris, and they can't run anymore. And she goes, oh, well, they can run. Okay, Nancy, we see you. We see what you're up to. Yeah, it's a pretty closed situation, but the point here with the silver bulletin is some of the polls that kind of do show Democratic voters testing against Harris on an open field, meaning multiple candidates, none of whom are Joe Biden. On average, since Biden's disastrous debate, she received 39% of the vote in these polls versus 17% for the second-place candidate, who is in some cases an unrealistic option of Obama. So this is, putting her up against other people and seeing if they would be more desirable. And pretty much every poll, she really does win. This included a 65-7 lead over Newsom in a morning consult poll conducted yesterday and today after Biden's announcement. So pretty clear that if they want anyone, it does seem that they want her. He makes a pretty good case throughout this article that Democrats, if they had to choose, it would be Kamala. It would be Kamala Harris. Like, that's something they would be pretty comfortable over. There was a poll, for example, if we go back, there's one poll that had 65-7 Kamala or Newsom, as Silver mentioned, 42-22 Harris over Obama, 31-17 over Newsom, and there's a lot of them kind of testing her with Newsom, where she pretty much easily wins. Note that something changed in these polls since the last time Biden's status as a nominee was in question, when the pollsters asked Democrats about a series of hypothetical primary matchups in the early winter and spring. Harris only led 23-17 in those polls, when there was much more of an appetite for some sort of open contest. What has changed then? Maybe it's sort of a flight to safety among Democratic voters, or a realistic assessment about who would be fit to take over on such short notice. If you're a Democrat who isn't happy with Harris as the nominee, you should probably be mad at Biden for not stepping aside earlier. And again, that's something we'll talk about in the whole kind of Democratic Party in that situation, to give other candidates more of a chance to make the choice for themselves. So I think that does kind of show you where Harris is in the polls. I think she is, definitely someone who maybe if in the heart of hearts, Democrats maybe not would they have picked her, but they probably feel the most comfortable with her in this current situation, this current set of circumstances. I think she's probably, in the polling, I think you're going to start to see her kind of claw back, especially as we get this kind of post-announcement, post-dropout polls. And we're already, I think one came from Morning Consult that had her, only down by 2, so making progress there for the Democrats. And I think we'll see that continue to go up as she has had some very positive, honeymoon period, I would say, in a lot of the kind of big liberal outlets, kind of getting that Democratic base back on side, getting that Democratic base enthusiastic again, which has been a very clear, kind of apparent thing to see. And I think, she does kind of put herself in a good position because we continue to see Trump hitting those at the very top of his game, kind of hitting those polls in the 46 to 50%. So, it does, I think, really suggest that he's a ceiling. He, even after the assassination attempt, didn't explode because, I think, of that ceiling. And you're going to see Kamala Harris, Joe Biden had a very clear ceiling too, and it was kind of coming down on him, was beginning to cave in. And I think that was largely hindered around his age, not necessarily the Democratic brand or maybe even his brand had he been, but so much his brand is being old, so it's kind of hard to say. But putting someone up against Trump who has such a low ceiling, and running someone who doesn't have that much of a ceiling, who is a lot more undefined, she can have a lot of obstacles like, racism and sexism that any black female candidate would face running for president. But, and she gave a little shout out to Shirley Chisholm in her speech. It was the first, I believe, black woman either to run for president or to be elected in the. Yeah, I think to run for president. I'm really doing bad on my history there, but gives that shout out. She got a lot of obstacles to overcome, of course, but the anti-Trump vote is so strong, and I think if there's any good chance for someone, a woman to win, I think it is right now. It is with the candidate of Trump. It is with the issue of abortion being such a big issue. And it was someone who, has proven, like, let's be 100% real, to be a really bad politician in the past, who has had a lot of staffing turnover at the vice presidential level, did a really bad Senate campaign, not a really bad Senate, a really presidential campaign turned to be pretty disastrous. She wasn't a super, electoral juggernaut, but, in the Senate, but it was California, so it doesn't really matter there. But she does have a bit of a more kind of competent team around her. Jen O'Malley Dillon is running her campaign. It was the same person behind Biden's campaign. O'Malley Dillon has got a lot more to work with now, and so I think that puts her in a better situation, maybe some of the people around her. But I think two different situations: the vice presidential office and the Senate campaign, just being run with such high levels of turnover, such high levels of leaking, not a good sign there at all. So hopefully, the Biden ship was pretty tight until the end. So we'll see if that's able to kind of translate over into a bit of a more tighter ship for Kamala Harris. But just to kind of give the general look about, through things, of what she had to say, with the party rapidly consolidating behind her, the chair of the Democratic National Committee announced the party would decide on a nominee by August 7th in an online vote that will take place before the convention. Harris, speaking to the Delaware campaign headquarters that Sunday, was working to reelect President Biden. Until that Sunday, was working to be-elect President Biden, vowed to pursue a brighter future for the country. She believes that if Trump is reelected, he would give tax breaks to big corporations, cut Social Security and Medicare, weaken the middle class, and reduce access to healthcare. So again, we're seeing the birth of what is going to be a kind of new, reinvigorated, and different campaign, hitting him on some of the things like abortion, which I think is very smart, and cutting welfare. Going to be a very big deal. But she did kind of highlight that it has to be a positive campaign. It can't just be against Trump. It's going to be what would the Democrats do has to play a role. And we're not really seeing that too much, I would say, in this kind of very introductory speech from Harris, but I'm sure we'll see more. New York Times here hits him with even Biden sounding hoarse and tired as he recovered from COVID, called in the event by phone. But meanwhile, Speaker Nancy Pelosi endorsed Harris on the ticket, calling her brilliantly astute, which is a big help for her. Harris's campaign announced on Monday that it had raised $81 million in the first 24 hours, a record-breaking showing. Scoop game endorsements from J.B. Pritzker, Gretchen Whitmer, Andy Bashir, Wes Moore, Tim Waltz, and Tony Evers. Several of them who have been talked about possible running mates. Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are holding out, though, respecting her wish to earn the nomination through an open and competitive process, which she conveyed in a written statement on Sunday as she sought to diffuse complaints of a coronation. And Barack Obama has also not endorsed her. Some other things that we know. She praised Harris's big heart in an event. Harris praised Biden's big heart, in an event with the NCAA championship teams at the White House earlier on Monday before she went to Delaware to speak. And Trump and Vance have also pivoted both to attacking Kamala Harris, linking her to issues like inflation and the border. And the Connecticut Democratic Party will meet Monday to vote on whether to award the state's 74 delegates to Harris. The Florida Democratic Party said that 236 of its 254 delegates to the DNC had pledged their support to Harris, and the DNC delegates from North Carolina, South Carolina, Maryland, and Tennessee. Also, just before I started recording, I saw California as well, were the first state delegations to come in and formally back her. I believe I saw Pennsylvania as well, which is going to be pretty big. The president has been isolating since testing positive for COVID last Wednesday, and no public events on the schedule for Monday. It remained uncertain when he would return to Washington. Possible Oval Office address, New York Times says, on Tuesday. Another interesting thing a lot of people were talking about, and this kind of leads into our next story. The Vice President Harris will meet with Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel this week, her staff said on Monday, but she will miss the Prime Minister's speech in Congress on Wednesday because of previously planned travel to Indianapolis. So this could be more of an opposition decision. It could be more of a sea change in a potential relationship she would have with Israel. I know it's a big thing a lot of people are paying attention to, especially on the left, but it is very solidly in wait-and-see mode. We just don't know how she is going to meet this moment. But I think it is pretty significant she's not dropping everything to rush back to the speech, which some other Democrats would have. Okay, this is actually just in as I was recording this. Apparently, she has secured the support of 1,967 of the 1,976 delegates for the nomination, according to the Associated Press delegate tracker. I think it's also important to continue to keep an eye on the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Some of the latest stuff, I guess you could say, some of the really massacres. At least 40 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli airstrikes in Khan Younis, south of the Gaza Strip, since the early hours of Monday, July 22nd, as the Israeli army launched a new surprise offensive on the city. The new offensive targeted parts of eastern Khan Younis, where around 400,000 people have been concentrated, including many families displaced multiple times since Israel's assault on the Strip. A really devastating situation, where the remaining health centers have, of course, gone out of service. And, the hospitals as well under threat. Al-Nasser Hospital, the only remaining functioning hospital in Khan Younis, announced it can no longer deal with the overwhelming number of wounded. The videos, they may not be getting as much attention with all the chaos going on at home, but they are overwhelming and they are really, really disgusting stuff. Palestinian rescue teams recovered hundreds of dead bodies from the streets of Khan Younis over the course of weeks following Israel's withdrawal. And meanwhile, they're not stopping after the ICJ ruling on occupation that we talked about. Of course, that has only emboldened Israeli settlers more to trample on international law, unheeded by, unabated by the U.S. government or anybody and anything like that. Israeli settlers on Monday attacked Palestinian residents and international solidarity activists at the village of Kusra near Nablus, injuring a number of them, while another Israeli settler targeted the village of Marama near Nablus, where settlers set fire to olive tree groves, according to local sources. More settler attacks reported in Hebron and in the north of Ramallah. Ramallah, I think it's probably the Arabic way to say it. These attacks came a day after the ICJ. And again, when we saw the previous ICJ ruling, that was what was the prelude to the Rafah incursion. Like, this is a completely rogue state. Like, this is a country that has stopped and is literally witnessing or watching the whole world watch them essentially stab the Palestinian people in the heart again and again and again. and watching the blood pour out everywhere, landing at the shoes and landing on the faces and on the hands of Western powers like Joe Biden and Keir Starmer now in the UK and all the people in the EU that were so behind this, but honestly no one more really than Joe Biden in the United States. This is continuing. They're doing it flagrantly, even more flagrantly by the day. Just last week, 68 members of parliament voted for a resolution officially condemning a two-state solution in Israel. The only people to vote against it were, the Arab members in the Knesset, as the Zionists like to say. And, that shows you what influence they have in their kind of token position. And again, this includes people like, Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid, the sensible Israeli leaders that Biden, wants us to believe are just around the corner waiting to, bring peace to the situation. And this comes at a really tough tax situation for the West Bank. Israeli finance minister with powers of the West Bank, Bezalel Smotrich, was recorded saying that he had been transferring authorities over the West Bank from the army to government bodies under his control in order to prevent the West Bank from being part of a Palestinian state without the government being accused of annexation. Which is a very kind of clever, but of course, transparent in Israel, but completely underreported move here in the U.S. On Thursday, the Israeli army issued a military order allowing itself to control urban growth in the construction of Area B of the West Bank, including demolition of buildings and banning of new ones. So that's definitely something to keep a very, very close eye on. Meanwhile, Yemen announced the number of victims in Israel's attack at the Hodeidah port reached 9, and Israel should expect the group's, the Houthi leader, Abdel Malek al-Houthi, which is leader of Ansar Allah, the group, which is referred to as the Houthis in the West, said that Israel should expect the group strike at any moment and without lines following a Yemeni drone strike that hit Tel Aviv on Friday. And again, we're just continuing to see complete ignorance of any kind of ceasefire deal that doesn't involve complete ending of the war from the Netanyahu camp, which is why Biden, in his efforts, he's been a little distracted, but his efforts have been unsuccessful. And, before we change topics, I just really wanted to play for you this incredible, and there's no words. And just, while you listen to this, I want you to think about all the people who have come out and said, Biden's a great man. He's a perfect, he'll be remembered as one of the best presidents we've ever had. And think about, and especially if you think that too, think about, because I know some people listening to this probably do think that. He's a pretty good guy. He was a decent man. Good old Joe. Think about what he said and how he supported this, what you're about to listen to, every step of the way. This is on CBS this morning.
When were you in Gaza?
End of April for the first couple weeks. And then there's sniper bullets. I have children that were shot twice.
And again, I apologize here. This is a Jewish-American doctor, Mark Perlmutter, who went to Gaza to really do the Lord's work and help out. And again, listen to this. Think about Joe Biden. Think about what he has said, how he has supported this, and then the contrast of how he's being remembered after he dropped out today.
Wait, you're saying that children in Gaza are being shot by snipers?
Definitively. I have 2 children that I have photographs of that were shot so perfectly in the chest I couldn't put my stethoscope over their heart more accurately, and directly on the side of the head. In the same child. No toddler gets shot twice by mistake by the world's best sniper. And they're dead center shots.
In fact, more than 20 doctors recently in Gaza also told Sunday morning about gunshot wounds to children. One American doctor told us he even reviewed CT scans to confirm what he saw because he, quote, didn't believe that this many children could be admitted to a single hospital with gunshot wounds to the head. Some shootings have been captured on video.
So, of all the disaster zones you've seen, how does Gaza compare?
All of the disasters I've seen combined, 40 mission trips, 30 years, ground zero, earthquakes, all of that combined doesn't equal the level of carnage that I saw against civilians in just my first week in Gaza.
And when you say civilians, is it mostly children?
almost exclusively children. I've never seen that before. Never seen that. I've seen more incinerated children than I've ever seen in my entire life combined. I've seen more shredded children in just the first week.
Shredded?
Shredded.
What do you mean?
Missing body parts, being crushed by buildings, the greatest majority, or bomb explosions, the next greatest majority.
We've
taken shrapnel as big as my thumb out of 8-year-olds.
The UN reports that to date, more than 80% of Gaza's population has been displaced, and the majority of its buildings destroyed. A reality which has taken its own toll on the well-being of children.
What about the emotional wounds?
How can you measure that? I can't measure my own. How do you be an orphan and watching your family, melted in front of you and shredded in front of you? How do you fix that? Ever fix that?
In fact, so many Palestinian children have had family members killed that doctors created a shorthand term, WCNSF, Wounded Child, No Surviving Family.
It's absolutely unforgivable. I was going to talk about, the Secret Service and this director being told to resign by bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats, but, this is something that we have completely supported, that Biden has supported every single step of the way. Democratic Party has supported every single step of the way. And, if you're out there, you're calling Joe Biden a good man, you're going to vote Democrat in the fall, good for you. That's your personal decision. But remember and think about how you view the humanity of Palestinians if you come out and you go and endorse that. Because I know as sure as hell that I will certainly not be endorsing the fucking party that used American resources in that way and stood for it every single step of the way, causing absolute destruction, absolute genocide of an entire group of people, live streamed on video. In October, there was a press conference of kids standing over dead fucking bodies being told or it's begging for mercy from the world to save them. And we've done nothing. And I cannot endorse that. I cannot sit by and stand that. It is just, I can't even, I'm not even continuing with this show. This is just, it is so outrageous. I feel like I have let it slip. I have not put enough effort. I have not thought, or I've in some ways, let it slip from the front of my mind. But this is a century crime, a crime of a century. It is unbelievable. And again, it's something that this supposed good man, this selfless president, this top tier president, this is his legacy. This is it. Wounded child, no surviving family. This is something that he has supported every step of the way. And he's disgusting, and he deserves to go straight to hell, as long as right there with, Anthony Blinken, Jake Miller, Matthew Miller in the State Department, everyone who profited, everyone in the United States government, and also, the Israeli government as well, who made their careers, who profited off this, who told these lies again and again and again, just straight, you cannot, imagine me to, or ask me to imagine punishments fit enough for these people. Just disgusting stuff. And there is no way, I'm telling you right now, there is no way I can endorse even Kamala Harris, who, in my mind, has this blood on her hands just as much as Biden. I can't endorse that in the fall. I can't even do that. It's just disgusting.